Have you ever walked into a room and felt someone's presence before they even said a word? That quiet intensity, that invisible pull. That is feminine magnetism, not the kind that shouts, flashes, or performs, but the kind that radiates silently, deeply, undeniably. It's not about seduction, it's about soul. And yet, so many have forgotten it. Because in a world obsessed with visibility, performance, and validation, the most powerful form of attraction has become the most suppressed presence. This isn't new. Feminine energy, when fully embodied, is ancient. It's what made kings abandon their crowns, poets lose sleep, and warriors kneel. It's not in the outfit, the lipstick, the curve of the waist. It's in the stillness, the gaze, the way a woman exists in her own skin, without explanation. That's not chemistry. That's energy. And energy doesn't lie. But something happened. Somewhere between self-help hashtags and algorithmic love, we began to equate magnetism with effort. Women were told to chase, to mold, to market themselves like products. Be prettier, be louder, be more available. But real feminine energy doesn't chase. It doesn't scream. It whispers. And in that whisper lies a force so ancient, it unnerves those who don't know how to receive it. Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." The truth is, feminine magnetism doesn't come from how others see you. It comes from how deeply you've seen yourself. It's not taught in dating guides. It's remembered. It's what remains when you strip away everything you were told to become. It's not a skill, it's a return to your essence. And once you remember it, you don't need to convince anyone of your worth. You simply are. And that alone is what captivates. That alone is what makes him stop in his tracks, not because you tried, but because you finally stopped trying. Chapter 2. Why most women suppress their true magnetism. Ask a little girl what she wants, and she'll tell you without hesitation. Ask a grown woman, and you'll often hear silence. Not because she doesn't know, but because somewhere along the way, she was taught to stop trusting her own desire. Taught to make herself smaller, softer, safer. That's how the suppression begins. Not with a scream, but with a whisper that says, "Don't be too much, too loud, too emotional, too radiant, too alive." And that whisper becomes a prison. Carl Jung taught that what we deny in ourselves doesn't disappear, it becomes our shadow. It hides, waits, and shapes us from underneath. The parts of you that were once wild and magnetic, they didn't die. They were buried. Because someone once told you that your power made them uncomfortable. And instead of asking why they were afraid, you believed it was your job to shrink. So you dimmed. You stopped dancing when no one was watching. You began to doubt the glow in your eyes. You traded instinct for approval, expression for adaptation. Not out of weakness, but out of survival. Because a woman in her full magnetism can feel threatening in a world that prefers women who are digestible, agreeable, and easy to love. But here's the truth. The feminine that magnetizes is not the woman who's perfected herself. It's the one who reclaimed herself, who stared into the mirror and called back every part she abandoned, the sensual, the intuitive, the fierce, the soft, not to become desirable to others, but to become whole again. Suppression isn't silence. It's noise turned inward. It's the ache of not living as who you truly are. And when a woman begins to reclaim her shadow, when she no longer fears being too much, everything shifts. Her posture, her energy, her choices. Suddenly, she doesn't just enter a room, she fills it, not by force, but by alignment. And in that alignment, she becomes magnetic not because she tries, but because she no longer hides. There's a difference between being looked at and being felt. One grabs attention, the other holds it. And in a world where everyone is performing, it's the woman who stops performing, who becomes unforgettable. Manufactured attractiveness is loud, it sparkles, poses, perfects. It studies algorithms, it plays roles, it wants to be liked. But feminine magnetism, it doesn't need to be liked. It's not built on appearance, it's built on essence. Think about it. Manufactured beauty tries to control the reaction, contour the face, curate the outfit, practice the smile. But energy doesn't come from makeup or mirrors, it comes from alignment. From the woman who doesn't just show up looking polished, but who arrives fully present, unapologetically herself. That kind of presence, unforced, unfiltered, is rare. And it's magnetic. We've been taught to chase visibility, to win attention through effort. But real magnetism doesn't chase, it draws. And what draws is not the perfection of your image, but the truth of your energy. The way you breathe when you're at ease. The way your voice sounds when you're not performing. The way your body moves when it's not being judged. That's what lingers. That's what disarms. Men don't remember the flawless makeup. They remember how they felt in your presence. Not just what they saw, but what they sensed. Because real attraction isn't created, it's uncovered. And uncovering means removing the layers you put on to be accepted. It means stepping back into what was always there before the world told you to edit it. There's nothing wrong with beauty, with style, with expression. But when it's built on fear, fear of not being enough, fear of not being chosen, becomes a mask. And that mask, no matter how perfect, can never replace what's underneath. Your raw, intuitive, radiant truth. Feminine magnetism isn't an act, it's an energy. And once you stop trying to be seen and start allowing yourself to be felt, everything changes. You don't need to manufacture allure when you remember who you are. You are the magnet. You always were. Chapter 4. The Jungian Shadow. What you repress, you lose. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And for many women, what controls them isn't weakness, it's repression. The very qualities that make them magnetic: sensuality, intuition, emotional depth, are the ones they've locked away. Not because they aren't powerful, but because they were told those parts were dangerous. Too much, too unpredictable, too wild to be loved. So instead of expressing, they suppress. They become polite instead of passionate, passive instead of powerful, logical instead of intuitive. But here's the truth: no one teaches. What you push into the shadows doesn't disappear. It festers. And what was once magnetism becomes anxiety. What was once power becomes pressure. The light dims not because it's gone, but because you stopped feeding it. The shadow, as Jung described it, is the part of the psyche we disown. And for women, the shadow often holds the most radiant parts, the ones that were shamed into silence. That playful flirtation, that deep sensitivity, that sacred anger, that bold no. Those parts aren't flaws, they're gold. But until you reclaim them, you'll keep wondering why life feels numb, why attraction feels forced, why your presence feels like a whisper when you were born to roar. Repression weakens magnetism because it disconnects you from your own life force. You can't magnetize from a place of fear. You can't radiate while hiding. And most women aren't unattractive, they're just misaligned. They're tired of performing but afraid to be seen. They want intimacy but hide their intensity. They long to be chosen but won't choose themselves. Integration begins when you stop judging what's natural. When you stop trying to be good and start being whole. When you let the fire come back not to burn but to illuminate. Because the parts you were taught to bury are the very parts that bring you back to life. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about recovering someone ancient. You, entire, unapologetic, awake. That's what magnetism truly is: the light of a woman who has made peace with her own shadow. There's something inexplicably captivating about a woman who doesn't flinch, who hears, sees, feels, and yet doesn't react from chaos. She doesn't need to raise her voice to command a room. She doesn't need to prove her worth or win attention. Her stillness speaks louder than any performance ever could. Because real feminine magnetism doesn't shout, it resonates. It's not in her movements. It's in her being. We've been conditioned to believe that movement equals power. That the one who responds fastest, argues loudest, or loves hardest wins. But a magnetic woman isn't in a rush to respond. She pauses, observes, breathes, not because she's afraid, but because she's rooted, grounded, unmoved by drama, untouched by emotional winds that try to sway her into overreacting. Her stillness isn't weakness, it's sovereignty. This is what most people miss. Calm is commanding. Not the calm that hides emotion, but the kind that has already met the emotion, walked through the storm, and now stands at the eye of it. Men feel this even if they don't understand it. It unnerves them in the best way. She doesn't chase validation. She doesn't beg to be understood. She lets her silence speak, and it does. Stillness doesn't mean silence. It doesn't mean submission. It means presence, being fully in the moment without losing yourself to it. A magnetic woman isn't the one who never feels. She's the one who knows that not every feeling requires a reaction. And that presence, that inner regulation, that's what pulls others in. That's what whispers power without ever needing to shout. Jung believed that what we refuse to face within becomes our master. But when a woman faces her emotions without letting them control her, she becomes master of herself. And that mastery subtle, quiet, unwavering is magnetic. Because in a world addicted to noise, the woman who can hold her center becomes the one no one can forget. Not because she demands attention, but because her energy commands it. Chapter 6. Vulnerability as a superpower. We've been told for too long that vulnerability is weakness, that to be soft is to be fragile, that to open your heart is to invite pain. But what if the opposite is true? What if the most magnetic force a woman can embody is her willingness to feel, to reveal, to be seen not just in her strength, but in her tenderness? That's not weakness, that's power, real power. Carl Jung spoke of wholeness, not perfection, of integration, not rejection. And true feminine magnetism doesn't come from becoming untouchable, it comes from becoming whole. A woman who can say, "This is who I am, unfiltered, unmasked, unafraid," isn't fragile, she's a force. Because while others hide behind personas, she shows up with her soul. Most people run from their wounds. She walks straight into them, not to bleed, but to understand, not to be rescued, but to be revealed. And in that revelation, there is a depth that no amount of surface beauty can replicate. Because the woman who can cry without shame, love without fear, and speak her truth without apology holds a frequency that is unmistakable. You feel it in your bones. You trust it, even when you don't understand it. Vulnerability is magnetic because it's rare. Not the kind that spills for attention, but the kind that risks authenticity without knowing how it will be received. That kind of bravery makes her unforgettable. While others protect their image, she protects her truth. And that truth creates an intimacy that no script can fabricate. To be vulnerable is not to be open to harm, it's to be open to life. It's the woman who can hold both her strength and her softness in the same breath. Who doesn't armor up to be respected? Who doesn't shrink to be loved? She simply is raw, real, radiant. When Jung said we must integrate the opposites within us, this is what he meant. To be both shadow and light, fire and water, stillness and emotion. And in that integration, in that fearless exposure of her full self, a woman becomes magnetic. Not because she hides the cracks, but because she shines through them. We live in a world that teaches women to chase approval, chase success, chase love. Be the one who texts first, be available, be impressive, be everything, so maybe, just maybe, someone will choose you. But feminine energy was never meant to chase, it was meant to radiate, to draw in what matches its frequency, not run after what doesn't. You don't magnetize through pursuit. You magnetize through presence. You attract not because you push, but because you embody. You don't prove your worth, you remember it. And when a woman starts remembering, her energy shifts. She no longer asks, "Am I enough?" She knows she isen that knowing becomes her gravity. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And who you truly are doesn't need to be performed, polished, or pitched. It needs to be reclaimed. There's nothing more captivating than a woman who has stopped trying to be chosen, because that's when she becomes the one who does the choosing. Radiance doesn't require effort, it requires alignment. It comes from being rooted in your own body, your own values, your own quiet confidence. And when you radiate like that without force, without expectation, everything that isn't aligned with your truth naturally falls away. What stays, what arrives, is what's meant for you. Feminine magnetism is a frequency. It doesn't beg, it doesn't prove, it doesn't perform. It exists fully, richly, unapologetically. And when you start existing in that truth, the dynamic changes. You're no longer waiting to be seen. You are seen, not because you raised your voice, but because your silence carried power. Not because you chased them down, but because your light was too real to ignore. The world might not be used to it. It might call you aloof, too independent, intimidating, but the man who sees clearly will call it what it really is, rare. And in a world full of women trying to be chosen, the one who radiates will always stand apart, not because she's trying to be special, but because she finally remembered she already is. Chapter 8. The Intuitive Woman. Listening to what's not said. There's a kind of woman who doesn't just hear your words, she hears your energy. She listens not with her ears, but with her presence. She sees through masks, feels beneath the surface, senses what's being withheld even in silence. That woman is intuitive, and her magnetism isn't loud. It's felt, deeply, unconsciously, powerfully. Most people communicate to be heard. The intuitive woman listens to understand. And that understanding doesn't come from intellect, it comes from resonance. She picks up on the emotional undertones others miss. The tension behind the smile, the hesitation behind the compliment, the truth behind the story, and in that silent knowing, she becomes magnetic because being seen that deeply is rare. Jung said that intuition is perception via the unconscious. It's not logic, it's not evidence. It's a knowing that doesn't ask for permission. And when a woman trusts that inner voice, when she stops doubting her gut, she becomes impossible to fool. She doesn't play games because she sees through them. She doesn't need explanations because she already knows. But this kind of depth can feel dangerous, to some, even threatening, because being in her presence is like standing in front of a mirror that reflects everything you've tried to hide. And yet, men are drawn to her. Not because she flatters, not because she performs, but because she feels like home. Not comfort in the shallow sense, but comfort in the truth. With her, they don't need to impress. They can simply be. And that's intoxicating. An intuitive woman doesn't chase attention. She doesn't need to. Her very presence says, "I see you, even when you hide." And that kind of sight can't be taught. It's earned through silence, solitude, inner work. She's not easily impressed because she values depth. She's not easily shaken because she listens beyond the noise. This kind of magnetism doesn't fade, because it's not based on what she looks like or what she says, it's based on what she knows. And what she knows creates a field of presence so rich, so resonant, that even in stillness, she leaves a mark. Not because she tried to, but because she's mastered the language that doesn't speak in words, the language of the soul. There's a kind of woman who doesn't need to speak to be heard. She doesn't need to reveal anything to be felt. Her presence alone stirs something deep, primal, quiet, and unforgettable. That's not sexuality, that's sensuality, and it has nothing to do with seduction and everything to do with embodiment. Sensuality is the art of being in your body, of moving through the world with a grace that comes from grounding, not from control. It's in the way she walks unhurried, fully present in each step. It's in the way she breathes, as if each inhale reminds her that she belongs here. It's in her voice, in her gestures, in the way her hands move when she speaks. None of it is exaggerated. None of it is forced, and yet it captivates completely. Carl Jung said that to become whole, one must integrate the unconscious into the conscious. Sensuality lives exactly therein, that in-between space. It is presence expressed through movement. A woman who is sensual doesn't need to attract, she simply allows. She's not trying to be watched, she's fully experiencing herself. And that self-experience becomes the very thing that draws others in. This kind of magnetism unnerves those who don't know how to meet it. Because it requires more than visual attraction, it asks for reverence. It demands presence in return. A sensual woman isn't a performance. She's a rhythm, and that rhythm cannot be duplicated, it can only be felt. She isn't disconnected from her body. She's in conversation with it. She trusts its signals, honors its cycles. She doesn't rush to fit a mold, she listens. And because of that, her presence softens the air around her. She doesn't dominate a space, she enriches it. Slowly, subtly, unforgettably. This is the kind of woman who doesn't need to reveal skin to stir desire. Her aura speaks before her body ever does. Because when a woman is grounded in herself, fully alive in her senses, she becomes a mirror reflecting back to others their own forgotten longing to feel. And that kind of feeling? That's not lust. That's resonance. And it leaves a mark. Chapter 10. Self-trust is seductive. Confidence is often misunderstood. We think it looks like volume, like dominance, like always having the last word. But real confidence, the kind that captivates without trying, is quiet. It doesn't need to announce itself. It simply walks into a room and exists. And when a woman trusts herself deeply, it's felt before it's seen. There's nothing more seductive than a woman who doesn't seek permission to be who she is, who doesn't ask, "Is this okay?" before speaking her truth. She doesn't dress for validation. She doesn't filter her thoughts to be liked. She isn't performing for the crowd. She's simply anchored in her worth, her wisdom, her knowing. Carl Jung believed that wholeness is the result of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. A woman who trusts herself has done this work. She's walked through fire. She's doubted, fallen, risen, and now, she doesn't need you to approve of her path. She's already chosen it, and that quiet certainty is magnetic. You see it in her boundaries, not walls, but gates. She doesn't need to push people away to protect herself. Her energy filters who stays and who goes. She doesn't chase, she doesn't compete. She doesn't prove, and because of that, people lean in, because her self-trust becomes an invitation. You can meet me here, but only if you come correct. A self-trusting woman is not unshakable because she has no fear. She's unshakable because she's met her fear and kept going anyway. Her confidence is not ego, it's intimacy with herself. She knows her rhythms, she honors her intuition, she doesn't collapse under doubt, because doubt no longer drives her. And for men, that kind of woman is unforgettable. Not because she tries to impress, but because she no longer needs to. Her energy says, "I don't need to be saved. I'm already home inside myself." And being in the presence of someone who is home in their own soul, that's the kind of seduction that lingers long after she's left the room. There's a fine line between mystery and manipulation, and most people never learn the difference. One draws you in with depth, the other pulls you in with confusion. One whispers, "There's more to discover here." The other says, "Figure me out or lose me." The magnetic woman? She is mystery, not game. She doesn't play with emotions, she invites them. We've been taught that in order to keep someone's interest, we must stay unpredictable, unattainable, elusive. That love is a strategy. But that isn't mystery. That's fear disguised as power. And men feel the difference even if they can't always explain it. Real emotional mystery doesn't come from withholding. It comes from having depth. It's not about saying less to seem powerful. It's about speaking only what's true and letting the silence between the words do the rest. Carl Jung spoke often of authenticity. That real connection can only happen when two people meet with their masks off. A woman who knows herself doesn't manipulate to keep someone interested. She trusts that what's meant to stay will stay. Her mystery isn't crafted, it's inherent. It's in the layers she's lived through, in the stories she hasn't yet told, in the way she feels everything but only shares what matters. Manipulation is about control. Mystery is about presence. The woman who plays games creates distance even if she gets attention. The woman who offers her truth slowly, consciously, without rush or performance, that's the one who stays on a man's mind long after she's left. Because she made him feel, not just chase. True magnetism doesn't rely on tactics. It flows from alignment. A man doesn't stay because you confused him. He stays because you moved him. And he'll return again and again to the woman who challenged his depth, not his ego. Emotional mystery is sacred. Manipulation is noise. And the world already has enough noise. Be the woman who leads with soul, not strategy, and you'll never need to chase again. Chapter 12. The magnetism of meaningful silence. There's a silence that pushes people away, and there's a silence that pulls them in so deeply they forget how to breathe. A woman who can hold that kind of silence doesn't just enter a room, she changes the atmosphere. She doesn't rush to speak, to explain, to entertain. She doesn't fear the space between words. She trusts it, and that trust makes her magnetic. Carl Jung taught that the unconscious doesn't speak in language, it speaks in symbols, in dreams, in silence. And when a woman is comfortable in that realm, when she doesn't flinch in stillness, she awakens something ancient in others. Because in her silence, there's presence, and presence is power. In a world addicted to noise, she becomes the pause people didn't know they needed. With her, silence isn't empty, it's full of perception, full of awareness, full of subtle cues and sacred calm. She's not afraid to sit with you in the quiet. She's not trying to fill the space with reassurance. She knows that the most important truths often rise when words fall away. Men notice this deeply. They may not know why they feel so drawn, so calm, so seen, but it's because her silence is safe. Not the kind of silence that hides resentment or demands attention, but the kind that says, "You don't need to perform here, just be." This is what makes her unforgettable, not her volume, but her vibration, the stillness in her energy, the way she listens without interrupting, the way she makes room for your truth without trying to control it. And, when she does speak, her words land with weight. Because she's not speaking to be heard. She's speaking because what she says matters. Magnetism doesn't need constant motion. It doesn't need applause. Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is be fully present and quiet. That kind of silence isn't absence, it's intimacy. And the man who is ready for it won't run. He'll lean in, captivated by the space she holds, not because she demanded attention, but because she made him feel like he could finally exhale. There's a story we're told from the beginning that we are incomplete, that we are halves waiting to be found, waiting to be chosen, waiting to be filled by someone else. And so we search. Not for love, but for completion. But a magnetic woman knows the truth. She is not a half. She is already whole. She doesn't look for someone to fix her, to validate her, to define her worth. She's not auditioning for a role in someone else's life. She's not saying, "Choose me so I can feel like enough." She's saying, "I am enough, and I'll only walk with someone who reflects that truth back to me." That energy, that sovereignty, that's what magnetizes. Carl Jung said that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there's any reaction, both are transformed. But transformation doesn't happen when one person is desperate to be filled. It happens when two people meet in their fullness, not their longing. She doesn't want another half. She wants a mirror, a partner, a presence that doesn't complete her but resonates with her. This woman is no longer waiting. She's aligning. She's no longer chasing the illusion of someone to make her feel whole. She's tending to her own garden, loving her own silence, growing her own roots. And from that place of self-possession, she attracts not out of need, but out of clarity. She is not afraid to walk alone because her path is not built on absence. It's built on truth. And in that truth, she's magnetic. Not to everyone, but to the ones who feel the difference. Because when a woman stops needing love to define her, she begins to define what love is. And the love she chooses? It isn't born from fear or lack or performance. It's born from resonance, from recognition, from the quiet power of two souls who don't complete each other, but expand together. Chapter 14. The Woman Who Cannot Be Owned. There is a certain kind of woman who can never be owned, not because she's guarded, not because she's afraid to love, but because she belongs to herself first, always, and without apology. And that kind of woman? She doesn't just attract, she captivates. She will love you deeply, wildly, without hesitation. She will show up with her full heart, her full presence, her full truth. But she will never hand you the keys to her soul and say, "Here, take over," because her soul is not a space to be claimed, it is a temple to be respected. She may let you in, but only if you knock with reverence. Jung taught that individuation, the path to wholeness, requires one to step outside the collective script. And this woman has done exactly that. She no longer plays the role of the compliant, convenient, easily digestible version of herself. She has rewritten the story. She is not here to be tamed. She is here to be fully, fiercely, freely. What makes her magnetic isn't her detachment, it's her freedom. She doesn't need anyone to carry her, fix her, or complete her. She is her own ground, her own breath, her own center. And from that place of rootedness, she loves not out of dependency, but out of overflow. And that love? It's not desperate, it's divine. The men who meet her feel it immediately, that they are standing in the presence of someone who cannot be controlled. And while some are intimidated by it, the right ones are drawn in like gravity. Not because she seduces, but because she radiates. Freedom, after all, is the deepest kind of allure. And a woman who is free within herself, who does not perform for approval or bend for comfort, that woman is unforgettable. She doesn't ask to be kept. She doesn't plead to be understood. If you can meet her where she is, great. If not, she will not shrink. She will not fold. She will simply keep walking in the direction of her own becoming. Because her path isn't paved by ownership, it's paved by truth. And that truth is this: she is already home, with or without you. There comes a moment in every woman's life, not loud, not dramatic, but quietly undeniable, when she feels the spark inside her stir again. A heat she once dimmed, a voice she once silenced, a flame she thought she had to hide to be loved. And in that moment something ancient awakens. Not something new, but something remembered. She remembers the version of herself that was never built for performance, the one who didn't contort to be palatable, the one who laughed from her belly, cried without apology, said no without guilt, the one who carried chaos and grace in equal measure, who didn't apologize for her power or her softness or her stillness. That woman didn't disappear, she was buried, and now she rises. Carl Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and this moment of awakening is where true magnetism is born. Not from effort, not from strategy, not from pretending to be less than what you are, but from reclaiming all the parts you disowned in order to be accepted. You were never meant to be easy. You were meant to be whole. And wholeness includes the wild, the gentle, the intuitive, the sensual, the fierce, the vulnerable. Your magnetism is not a mask, it's the light that leaks through the cracks once you stop patching yourself up to be liked. Let the fire return not to burn, but to illuminate. Let your energy rise not to chase, but to call in. Let your truth speak not for applause, but for liberation. You don't need to chase love. You don't need to earn worth. You don't need to play small so someone else can feel big. Your presence is the invitation, and the ones who are meant for you will recognize it. Not because you tried to be what they wanted, but because you became what you were born to be. So if you feel that ember inside you, fan it. Feed it. Let it rise. Because the soul-level magnetism that truly captivates a man doesn't come from what you perform, it comes from what you remembered to be. You. Whole, radiant, untamed, home. This story was intense. But this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.